Good afternoon. Apologies for the delay. My name is Stephen Beattie. I was going to say I'm the review editor at Quill and Choir. I'm not the review editor at Quill and Choir anymore. I haven't been for almost a year and a half, but I was for 12 years. I'm now a journalist and a critic in Stratford, Ontario, and it is my absolute pleasure to be with you here at the Word on the Street Community Pop-Up to celebrate the 2022 Toronto Book Award nominees. Before we begin this event, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the history of the place where we are gathered today. The City of Toronto exists because of the Toronto Purchase, also known as Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation in 1805, with a final claim settlement in 2010. The territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace, which we now all share responsibility for upholding. The Dish with One Spoon was born in part out of the Anishinaabe concept of all our relations, which is the awareness that we are connected to and reflected in all the living and non-living beings around us. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples with long histories on this land, and acknowledging this is only the first step in building a practice of land stewardship and Indigenous solidarity that honors these peoples. I am now pleased to introduce our first set of readers who are appearing on behalf of playwright Falen Johnson with support by Native Earth Performing Arts. And before we get to the performance on stage, I should note that one of the actors who was supposed to be here to read from Two Indians, Samantha Brown, fell ill and was not able to make it. So one of the jurors from the Toronto Book Awards, Anne Y.K. Choi, will be standing in for her at today's reading. I also have a note from Falen Johnson, which I'm going to read, but first of all, I'll give you the jury citation for Falen's play. Two Indians is about love, courage, and reclamation. Wynne leaves the res to find her cousin Ro in Toronto. With the promise of the best view of the full moon, she lures her to a back alley where they talk about the most difficult time in their lives. A family tragedy is uncovered, and Ro comes clean. Falen Johnson shows how Indigenous families have survived everything: residential schools, the 60s scoop, the current scoop of children, by supporting each other through all of it. Two Indians tells stories of addiction and recovery, loss and reclamation, with humor and love. As the moon rises over the city, Wynne and Rose rise up to meet the challenges awaiting them back home. This book is a must-read for students everywhere. And Falen Johnson is unable to be here herself today, but she has sent these remarks. Hello. First off, I am so sorry I couldn't be with you all in person today, but I have left you in the most capable hands of Yolanda Bonnell and Anne Y.K. Choi. Both of these amazing people, both Yolanda and Samantha Brown, have performed in Two Indians. This will be Anne's debut as an actor in this play. I know they will give you a fine reading of the words. They always do. I want to thank them both for making time to read the words once again. I also want to thank Word on the Street and the Toronto Book Awards. Thank you to the jury for selecting Two Indians. Seeing my name alongside all the other nominees is pretty wild. It means a lot to be in such good company. Two Indians is a play I started writing back in the time of Idle No More. The piece at first was a short 10-minute piece, and eventually I expanded it. Through the telling of this story, I got to process a lot of what I was feeling in the wake of Idle No More, as well as everything that came after. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Report, Colton Boushie, Tina Fontaine, the list goes on. Writing this piece let me reflect and rage while trying to find the humor that is so integral to Indigenous people. So many of us, we fight to find the light. We fight to remember that our feet land on these lands and that we are still here against so many odds. This piece is about ceremony, finding it where and how we can, and recognizing the inherent right we have to practice it, however that looks. It's about family and loss and connection. It's about memory. Special shout out to my siblings and cousins, Growing up Indigenous, the line between cousin and sibling is pretty blurred in the most fantastic way, and much of this story comes from them. The scene you're about to watch is between cousins Ro and Win. Ro has been living in Toronto for a few years after leaving the res following a tragic accident. Win still lives on the res, but has come to town to convince Ro to come home. The two are in a Parkdale alleyway, waiting for the moon to rise. To perform a scene from Two Indians, please welcome Anne Y.K. Choi and Yolanda Bonnell.
Hi, Ani. I guess just a bit of a content warning before we begin that there are some curses in this play. So just a warning, just a little heads up. The other day there was this Indian woman in the store. She was the spitting image of Auntie Dana. I thought it was her for a second. Little and brown, cat shirt, yarn poking out of her purse, wearing transitional lenses, just cute, you know? And so I was really helping her, ignoring everyone else in the store, helping her more than I help anyone else. And when she gets up to the counter to pay for her stuff, I ask her if she has a status card. And she says, no, not on me. And so I tell her she can use mine. And she smiles, and so I go get my card from my wallet, and then, I bring it up.
Doesn't anyone notice when you do stuff like that?
No, God, no. Most of the people don't even know how to deal with tax exemption on the computer. There is, clearly a button, idiots.
They just don't know. Lots of people don't.
No, trust me, idiots. You haven't met them.
Well, you gotta teach them.
I ain't gotta do shit.
Then they'll never know how to deal with a status card. You have to teach them.
Why is that my job to teach them?
Because no one else will. You know that. Why would they? They have to see us then.
Are we talking about the same thing here?
We are. We have to be teachers. We do.
Oh, here we go.
No, not here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, fine. We don't have to. Then who explains that no one learns anything and we just disappear?
I'm not going anywhere. And do your own work. It's not like I came out of the womb with my history written down in a manual. I had to go looking.
I know that.
It's not like it doesn't exist. There is stuff out there. It's not even that hard to find. You just have to do the work, read an effing book. Quit asking me to tell you everything in fucking Cole's Notes format. I am tired of trying to find a metaphor that adequately encompasses what went down here. Imagine someone walked into your house and said it was theirs and they took your kids away and blah, blah, blah. There isn't a simple way of explaining this. It takes work. It takes undoing in your own brain to decolonize yourself.
Well, no one is getting on a boat and going home, so I guess we had better find a way to explain this history then to them.
I just wish they would try.
I think some of them do.
I think most of them try their best to forget how they are here, why they are here, what's been built on our backs. Like a few weeks ago, there was this powwow right beside work, and I just got a pit in my stomach when I saw them setting up. That feeling when you know you are going to have to deal with it, that here we go feeling, that get ready for it feeling. And so everybody at work starts bitching and whining about how everyone coming in wants to sit on the patio so they can watch the dancers. One of the guys working from the patio actually said to me, "Hey, wagon burner, you should go do a rain dance so we can close the patio and we can all go home early." Right to my face, right to my face with a powwow happening. He was genuinely confused when I got pissed off. I just can't wait for them to catch up anymore.
Wagon burner, Jesus, that's funny. Wagon burner? What is this, a John Wayne movie?
I gotta look at that guy almost every day. And he's the boss's son, so what can I do? Tell on him? Not if I want to keep my job. I just feel so angry all the time. Or at least like I'm ready to be angry all the time. Like it's always right there at the door, waiting to jump out, almost wanting to jump out.
I think we all feel like that. Ready to fight? Maybe it's the Mohawk in us, the warrior. Maybe we carry that with us.
Maybe it's because 5 years ago, it was all different. No one knew anything, and now we have all these white folks lining up to be allies. And they all look at me with their eyes all big and full of tears and ask me to absolve their ancestors of something, and I am just sick of explaining it doesn't work that way. You don't get to cry on me.
Some people want to help. Is that so bad?
No, not really. If we know what that means. I just feel apprehensive, uneasy with all this sudden understanding.
Maybe you're just used to things being so bad that it's hard to feel like you're getting better.
Are they getting better? Because we have an acronym for missing and murdered women? I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I knew it was a thing. I knew we were being killed. I knew this, but somehow I didn't, you know? It's like the schools. We grew up 15 minutes away from one, drove by it more times than I could count, and I didn't know what that building was. I didn't know that our family went there because they did so well at hiding it in plain sight from us. They did such a good job of colonizing us that we couldn't see it. I just keep thinking there will be a new headline that explains to me some other atrocity I didn't really know about, but knew about, but I couldn't see, and it will fucking cut right through me. Again.
Jesus.
That's still you. That's still you.
You carry too much. You can't hold all that.
I'd rather hold it, try to see it.
How's that working out?
I'm just frustrated.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, shut up. You know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I just wonder what frustration gets you.
It makes me think. It makes me present. It makes me fucking care.
Why don't you just say what you mean?
It's different for you. I don't blame you. You live there.
You don't blame me?
Well, it makes things different.
Are you kidding me? You think I don't know that? I know that. I live it.
I know you know. In some ways, you know, the shitty cell phone signals that drain your battery, you gotta drive half an hour to get groceries, cheap smokes, cheap gas, everybody knows all your business. You'll be able to own a house by the time you're 30, but you'll never own the land.
And you think that is the difference? That is what makes here so different from there?
No, I don't think that's the only thing. I think the apathy is the thing. No one votes or even cares or pays attention to what is happening in the outside world.
For someone who hasn't been back in years, you certainly think you know a lot about us.
I don't have to go back to know what it's like.
And now you're all into foreign politics, voting for their government, taking part in their system.
Yeah, I voted. I didn't want that guy to get in, fucking dead-eyed, soulless zombie. And I wish you would think about voting.
You vote down home for band council?
Do you?
I don't believe in that system.
So you are, what, all traditional now? You longhouse?
Of course not.
Then what are you?
What am I? I'm your cousin. I was there when you fell out of that treehouse and broke your arm. I was your human shield on the way to the bus stop every day between kindergarten and grade 12 because you were terrified of dogs. I taught you to inhale a cigarette and how to forge your mother's signature. I was there when your dad left and you cried and cried. I was there. I was. And so why don't you ease up and stop shitting all over the place about a place you don't understand anymore?
Whoa.
Whoa? What do you think? You're the only person who could get pissed off? who is frustrated with every goddamn day? I see it. I know it. You're the one who left, so stop acting like this is everyone else's fault.
Sheesh. I missed you.
I miss you.
Thanks for teaching me to smoke. It's been really helpful.
You're such a shit. You ever think of coming back?
For what?
For anything.
I don't know. I feel more myself here than I ever did there.
They wish you would at least visit.
I know. I might.
You might?
I try.
You try? I don't get it.
I'm not asking you to.
It's home.
Not anymore, it's not. This is home now.
You have family there.
Not really.
Well, screw you then.
Oh, you know what I mean. I can't go back there. I know what they think. I know what they see. They can't see me without seeing it.
Well, no one blames you.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe.
You blame you.
They can't say that they blame me. They probably aren't even trying. Maybe they don't even really want to. I know that, but it's there. I see it. The way they look at me. There is this sympathy, this sadness. I'm not who I used to be. I'm a ghost cousin.
Just because you were in the car doesn't mean you died too.
You're right. And here, in the city, I can be alive. There, I am a reminder. I can't live being a tombstone.
Well, I guess this was for nothing then.
Miigwech.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yolanda Bonnell, and especially Anne Y.K. Choi. Yolanda has performed this play many, many times, so she's familiar with it. This, I think, is not only Anne's first time performing this play, it's her first time performing on a live stage. And I know you have a novel coming out next year, but if the writing doesn't work out, you may have a second career as a theatrical actor. Copies of Two Indians by Falen Johnson are for sale at the table. Another Story is selling books from all of our nominees, and I believe Yolanda is going to go over if you want to say hi or if you want to get a book signed. She will be available for you. And I think we can move on. Our next reader is H.N. Kahn, debut author of the YA novel Wrong Side of the Court. H.N. Kahn is a first-time author. Born in Pakistan, he emigrated to Canada at age 7 and grew up in Regent Park, a low-income community housing project. After graduating with a business degree, he decided to drop out of law school to pursue a career in the Toronto startup scene. Since then, he's helped build and market software that's being used by millions around the world, as if being a published author isn't enough. Here is the Toronto Book Award jury citation for The Wrong Side of the Court. In H.N. Khan's debut novel, Wrong Side of the Court, 15-year-old Fawad Chowdhury fantasizes about being the world's first Pakistani NBA player. But he's got a lot stacked against him, including family expectations, financial hardships, and gang violence. Set in Regent Park and nearby neighborhoods, Khan skillfully spotlights Toronto's diverse peoples, history, and cultures as integral to the story's unfolding. From the delicious parathas that Fawad indulges in to the play-by-play action on the basketball court, Khan engages us with a vivid writing style and a tenacious protagonist. A gritty and honest coming-of-age story, Wrong Side of the Court, ultimately transports readers into the lives of Khan's characters, shedding valuable insight into the life and challenges of modern youth living in Toronto. To read from Wrong Side of the Court, please welcome H.N. Khan.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thanks so much for attending. I did just fly in from Vancouver yesterday, so the time zone still getting, the jet lag still hitting me a little bit, so I appreciate your patience. Just to set the stage a little bit, this is a passage that I like to read. It's when Fawad finally is pushed by his high school coach to try out for the basketball team, and now his biggest hurdle is asking his mother permission to partake. And he gets a little surprising assist from his sister in the process. So I will take it away. Sorry. Ball, b-ball, basketball, hoops. So many ways to refer to the same sport. I'm scheming, strategizing, planning, or rather calculating how to convince my mother to let me try out for the school team. The whole commute home, I've been on autopilot, imagining one scenario after another. I need to anticipate her reasons for saying no. The most obvious reason is she wants me to focus on school. My parents always wanted me to be a lawyer, so I get mom wanting that now that dad is gone. Another reason she wouldn't want me out too late. The after-school practices would probably drive her worrying instincts mad. Regent after dark isn't the safest. I'll give her that much. Having a paranoid brown mother is like having a leash around your neck. I feel like I've earned her trust enough to have it hang loose, not have her tighten it. I'm a pretty good kid, comparatively speaking, for someone growing up in the hood. I got friends or no friends of friends who don't just act like gangsters, they are gangsters. Bandanas, turf, and heat. I don't really go near any of that. Never been into it. It helps that I'm like one of 5 Pakistani dudes in Regent, so it's not like we could just pull our weight together against the dudes from Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Somalia, Ethiopia, Jamaica, Vietnam, and China. People think I'm talking some United Nations crap when I explain to them that all these crews we deal with, not to mention what it takes to be a neutral party and be on friendly terms with all of them. Call me a diplomat. Because I mind my own business. I know when to cross the street and when to say what up to someone. I'm almost home and don't have any arguments down pat. Maybe I should just tell mom the truth, bare my heart, like a Bollywood hero trying to convince the girl's dad to let them be together. I reach to yank open the building's front door, denied. Looks like the superintendent is on top of shit. That was quick. I'm feeling around my pockets for my fob, but I ain't got my keys. Oh right, they're in the pocket of the jeans that I wore yesterday. Yikes. That means I didn't lock the door this morning. I tug at the door. It seems firm. I hate to do this, but I don't have many options. I run my hands together, grab the handle, put one foot on the wall, and pull. My face tightens. I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the glass pane and want to laugh. I kick the door before mustering up strength and give it one more tug. Success. I'm in. The building's safety is compromised. Meh. From outside our apartment door, I can hear my mother talking to someone on the phone. I have a good idea who it might be. I wait a few moments, since it sounds like the conversation's winding down. I knock. Nothing. I knock again. Finally, my mom comes and opens the door. Okay, call me after the wedding, she says before hanging up. The word wedding puts me on guard. I don't like it coming out of her mouth, to be honest. Where are your keys? I forgot them at home. She gives me a quick slap to the backside of my head. It doesn't hurt, but still, why? I try not to look her straight in the eyes, preferring to look at the floor instead. Sorry. Sorry, kabacha. I put my things away and start unwinding on the couch. She scoots me up to the side. Here, get up, let me show you something. She pulls out her phone and starts swiping to find WhatsApp. I'm tired. She gives me a stern look and says, I should slap you again. I said, get up. That will do it every time. I straighten up immediately. My mother's hands are like bricks. I think they got that way from needing all that dough. I don't want them to hit me again, either way. One of your cousins got married. Big whoop, like they have anything better to do back there. Oh, who? Farzana. I have no idea who that is. Another slap to the back of the head doesn't help rattle my memory. Your khala's daughter. Oh yeah, I still have no clue who she's referring to. She taps on her chat with Nusrat, whose last message contains more than 30 photos. She clicks on one of them and takes me through the slideshow. That's your Mamu, she says. That's the bride. Oh, look at her dress. Mamu is my mother's older brother. My uncle is bulky, short man with a paunch and mean-looking mustache. He's greeting the groom's party, the Barat, who's come to take his daughter away to a home 3 blocks down. Why does she have all that makeup on? Looks gross. Another slap to the head. Okay, so maybe she doesn't look so gross. She seems pretty happy. It's cute. I mean, she looks pretty. Who's the groom? Your Choti Khala's son. Look here. He's riding in on a horse. The groom looks handsome and thin and has thick curly hair poking out from under his turban. Dressed in a sherwani that's black with gold trimmings, he has serious look throughout the photos. Don't know what it is with my family and smiling in pictures. So weird. Oh, they're like, I say feeling my stomach turn upside down. Cousins, Mom says, like it's no big deal, continuing to scroll through the photos. Yeah, but I mean, that's like first cousins, I say, turning to face her and hoping she feels the gravity of my words. Nope, she just continues scrolling. So, I hold her shoulder so that she has no choice but to face me. This is my chance to make my point. Remember that time I told you about the news article talking about all those risks with cousin marriages? It's not good for the kids. There's a high risk for birth defects. That's rubbish. We've only ever done cousin marriages. I smack my forehead and shake my head in dismay. I just think if Abu was still around, he'd side with me, especially if he knew about the risks and whatnot. Well, too bad for you he isn't. Now you listen, she says, wagging her finger and ready to launch into her own defense of the whole thing. There's no winning with her on this. I have bigger fish to fry, so I played cool. Forget it. I'm hungry. Can we cook? There's okra in the fridge. Wash and cut it. I'll make it quickly. Okra? What about seek kebabs? Another slap to the head. That's like 5. I've lost count. Ow. Fine, geez. As I finish up slicing and dicing, I realize that while she's cooking up the turka and distracted, I should talk to her about the thing. I toss the ends of the okra and wash the knife and a few dishes still in the sink. Ami, do you know how much university costs in Canada now? No. She doesn't even look back. $40,000. She almost drops the wooden spoon. Hi Allah, that much, she says, one hand to her hip. I've gotten her attention now. Time to milk it. I know, right? I say, exaggerating my own disbelief. You know what, though? There are student loans available, and a teacher who's telling me there's a lot of scholarship money out there. See, that's why I tell you high school is very important. You need all, she says, going back to mixing the turka and throwing the diced okra in. Irfan's girl got accepted to U of T on a full scholarship. She had 98% average. I gulp. 98%? Those stupid hyper-smart brown kids make the rest of us pretty smart brown kids look dumb. Yeah, sure, grades are important, I say, drying the dishes, but school also look at what you do outside of the classroom, too. Like what? Like, extracurricular activities. Extra what? She says, stopping her stirring and turning to face me. Like clubs, sports, like how Jamila is student council president. Yes, so do something like that then. She's right back to cooking. Her attention span is worse than a goldfish's. Okay, here goes. I thought maybe I'd try out for the basketball team. You and that stupid sport are not a good match. How do you expect to concentrate on school if you spend so much time playing? I put away the dish towel and stand right next to her. Ami, I have an 85% average. Yes, but your father wanted you to go to law school. It's not easy to get in, she says. Gulnaz's daughter's been trying for the last 2 years. You need much higher marks. Goddamn Irfana and Gulnaz aunties and their daughters. I want to scream. I start pacing back and forth. Yeah, but Ami, you do realize undergrad will cost $40,000. If I play basketball, I have a shot at getting a sports scholarship. Uffallah, they have OSAP or something from the government. No basketball, pick anything else. OSAP, Ami. But that's student loans I have to pay back. You do realize that. She dashes a bunch of spices and a whole ton of salt into the pot before putting a lid on it to simmer. Then she moves swiftly to the fridge, taking out a container with kneaded dough for rotis. Her motions are smooth and effortless. She's already rolling a ball of dough and sprinkling it with additional flour before she stretches it and massages it into something she can go with her rolling pin. I'm losing steam and she's losing interest. I need to think fast. Abu would have let me try out, I say. She loses a little color from her face. I've stuck a nerve. Second time I've used a dad card today. This time it might just work. Well, too bad for you he's dead and can't give you permission from his grave then, isn't it? Ouch. She's putting in extra elbow grease with that rolling pin. Okay, wait. How about I average 90% this year? Could I try out then? I don't know if it's gonna make it. Silence. I'm on the edge of the seat. Come on. There's a heart in there somewhere. There's gotta be. No. She puts the flattened dough on the pan. It starts rising as she moves it around with her fingers. Doesn't matter how hot it gets. She refuses to use tongs. My final shot was swatted into the crowd. I can't get past her. I should just head back into the locker room, hang up the jersey for good. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm glad that you read that part of the book because it highlights the humor in the novel. And I found the humor to be incredibly leavening because there's some very dark material in this book, and I'd like to ask you about some of that. But first of all, what's the use of humor for you? Why is it important in this novel?
Yeah, I feel like when tackling, I think issues like growing up in a housing project or dealing with sort of the cultural differences that exist. I think giving readers some levity and kind of oscillating between the heaviness of it with some lightness, I feel like does bring a little bit more humanity to it. Right. So, because I feel like a lot of immigrant fiction and a lot of, that type of fiction can get very dense and very serious. And then for young readers especially, that can be a bit of a turnoff, I find.
Well, and I would assume, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would assume that another consideration is you don't want to turn this into just a trauma narrative, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's something I think I've been becoming exposed to a little bit more just through meeting other creatives, and I think realizing that a lot of times that is what is being milked and put on display a lot of times. So yeah, right. I would agree.
I hate asking this question, and I will probably be drummed out of, if there were a critics union, I would be drummed out of it for asking you this. But Fawad's mother wants him to become a lawyer. They live in Regent Park. Yeah. They're Pakistani by background. How much of this novel is autobiographical?
Yeah, I would say like 80%. I would say a lot of Fawad's a lot more confident than I am, and he's a much better basketball player, which, is a bit vicarious. I think if I was as good as I thought I was in my head, I played up to grade 10 before I realized that it was a losing battle, and I should really focus on my grades. But I kind of wanted to inject a little bit of optimism in Fawad's narrative. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. This book, I did mention that this goes to some very dark places. The book literally opens with a gang shooting.
Yeah.
And it's a scene that's played twice. It's played in the prologue of the book, and then you come back and replay the scene again in context in the chronology. There's a lot of profanity in the book.
Yeah.
There are issues of bullying. There's sex in the book, issues of burgeoning sexuality as Fawad, comes of age. But it's a young adult novel, and I'm interested in this notion of age appropriateness because you hear this a lot.
Right.
And I remember talking to John Boyne years and years and years ago. He wrote The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which is a Holocaust novel. And my question was, how do you write the Holocaust for kids? And he said the first thing you have to do is not condescend. I assume you would agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. I think adults, now being an adult, there's this tendency to kind of want to sugarcoat or buffer reality for youth. And I think we underestimate what youth are already exposed to outside of the confines of like a school, in terms of what's available on the internet and things of that nature. So I think in terms of I've heard from other friends who are English teachers and of the like that the profanity and things of that nature might get in the way of like, teachers wanting to, get their students to read it. But I think for me, fundamentally, like, I think kids want to be exposed to reality and being treated as adults, and not have that sugar-coated for them is my belief.
Do you worry that if you put too much of that material into a book and are too honest, that, as you were saying, school libraries won't stock the book, or it won't be made available to the readers that you want it to be available to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a fine balance, because at the end of the day, the decision makers and the gatekeepers, are going to hold sway, and they're going to have certain opinions about what is age appropriate, and obviously that's why all those guides and those ratings exist. But ultimately, I want to write something that youth will want to pick up and engage and read, and I think that requires tipping the balance a little bit. Obviously, we've edited it down. There's been many rounds of editing with various folks involved in the process. But so, yeah, I think it's a bit of a fine balance, for sure.
Right. Can we talk a bit about Omar, who is Awad's bully?
Right.
Where did that character come from?
So, I was a skinny brown kid growing up in Regent Park, kind of got dropped there, after my family had a bit of a setback. And there was a variety of experiences of being bullied, from both in school and in the community, and he's kind of like an amalgamation of, I think, various bullies that I encountered, and I think especially playing basketball in Regent Park, or any project setting, you get very territorial, and that is how people project their status in a way, and so whenever any of that is challenged, it can lead to outspurts of violence or pushback.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Right. There are also elements of racism in the book, but what I love about the cast is it's a multicultural cast.
Right.
So, those elements of racism, and there are some racial epithets that get thrown around.
Right.
Once again, though, it's honest to the milieu, right?
Right.
Again, sort of with the same as with the violence. I mean, how do you decide how far to push that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there were definitely moments where I don't know if there's a specific instance you want to touch on.
First of all, I don't want to give too much away.
Okay,
and also,
yeah. No, absolutely. So I think it is sort of, again, striking the right balance. Regent Park is such a multicultural place, and there's so many communities that are represented, and each community has their own story and has their own kind of narrative. And so, I think navigating appropriateness, it did require a little bit of like skill in terms of, what is and what isn't appropriate. But luckily editors and agents and things of that nature help, narrow out those blind spots as well. And even, there's like sensitivity readers for, that also catch stuff at the final stages. So,
did you use a sensitivity reader on this novel?
There was a sensitivity reader who was brought on, and I think they were from like a Muslim Pakistani background, and it was an interesting experience to go through. But fundamentally, I think that feedback was helpful in sort of, I think. Anticipating how it might be received, from various demographics, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah.
The other character that fascinates me is the basketball coach, who is an ex-teacher of the WOTS. And it's rare to find young people in YA novels who love their teachers.
Right.
But he was really enamored with this teacher. Was the teacher/coach based on somebody in your experience, or? So my high school teacher is sitting in the crowd right now, Mr. Reed, if you want to raise your hand. So he's my grade 12 writing craft teacher, in whose class I wrote my very first short story, up until which I was just writing poetry and journaling, and so he's kind of like my Robin Williams in some respects, and has really pushed me to, I sent him the first draft of this book, and
I remember his words. It was like, "It's not very good, but I think you've got something here if you continue to persist." And so I'm very grateful that I stuck with it. So
It's kind of a brutally honest response to the
yeah,
first
yeah,
draft of the first novel.
absolutely, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about Regent Park, because it's gone through so many changes since the Regent Park that's in this novel. What are your memories of Regent Park when it was strictly, as it was built, as socialized housing?
You know what? It was. So I moved there in like '99, I want to say, 99, 2000. And we were on the very edge. So like the title, wrong side of the court. So we were on the very edge of Regent Park on Girard Street, and literally a hop and skip over was Cabbagetown. And the further you went into Regent, the more murky it sometimes got. So a lot of times, there was a little bit of a buffer and some shielding from, I think, what happened or transpired. Obviously, being friends with a lot of kids who, lived a little bit deep. So, there was like North Regent, there was South Regent. Right. And it was all inward facing. And, learning a little bit about urban design and architecture a little bit later, just realizing it was very insulated.
Right.
It was designed to kind of be inward facing and kind of, I think it was part of the reason why so much of the violence and the drug trade and sort of the gang culture kind of perpetuated, because there was no throughways, there was no businesses in the community, and so and there was a 52% high school dropout rate at one point. So literally 1 in every 2 high school eligible kids was dropping out, and so what are they going to do? And so had my fair share of scares, but I also remember this kind of like warmth and vibrant circle and group of people who genuinely did care about each other, and it was a community unlike any other community I've experienced, in that you literally had people who are refugees from Sri Lanka, refugees from Somalia, and all these different places kind of come together, and it sort of formed this umbrella identity that allowed them to access certain resources and sort of try, in some cases build a better life for themselves, in some cases fall into the entrappings that come with that kind of a neighborhood.
Did it frustrate you that whenever Regent Park appeared in the Toronto media, it was always because of the violence that was going on, that they ignored that sense of community that was there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more frustrating now that there's these, condos and mixed income housing units there, that they don't mention the violence that still goes on, right. Because they probably don't want the real estate prices to be affected. So, I think it sort of goes both sides. Now that there is like a vested interest from, the external community, you don't see, like, I was just there recently talking with some, with a really wonderful woman who runs a mental health organization for Black youth there. Right. And I was like, oh, what's changed? Because I moved out when I was like 21. Like, has anything changed with the gentrification that's happening? And she was saying, you know what, it's in some cases it's gotten worse. Really? And because now there's actually even more of the difference between the people who are Toronto housing rentees versus people who own their condos, and everything from like the building material to like their experience of living there is very tiered and different. And so there really hasn't been, and so the youth and sort of the gang violence, it hasn't really been addressed and so it still happens. Right. In some cases, she was saying it's gotten worse because now kids at a younger and younger age are getting involved. So it was kind of disheartening to hear that, despite this complete revitalization, they called it. It's still
right. Will you still continue to go into the neighborhood and do community outreach and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing to do the book launch in Regent Park. It was like my first sort of like coming back full circle experience there at the and I definitely have a vested interest to kind of be involved and connect with the youth there, and hopefully we're trying to get this made into like a film or a TV show and sort of use that as a springboard to bring some more opportunities to like the youth and some of the folks interested in the arts there. And so I think that's like one way I'd love to continue giving back to the community. Yeah.
I think we've just about run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for the wrong side of the court. I want to thank you for your reading and congratulations on the Toronto Book Award nomination.
Thank you.
If you want to speak with H.N. Kahn further or get a copy of his book, he will be over at the Another Story bookshop table to do some signing. And I would like you to please help me thank H.N. Kahn.
Thank you.
And we're back. Our third reader from the Toronto Book Award shortlist is Sarah Polley with her new memoir, Run Towards the Danger. Sarah Polley is an Academy Award-nominated screenwriter, director, and actor. After making short films, Polley made her feature-length directorial debut in 2006, and most recently, she directed the film adaptation of Miriam Toews' novel, Women Talking. Here's the Toronto Book Award jury citation for Run Towards the Danger. In a brave, intelligent, and sometimes funny book of essays, Toronto director, screenwriter, and actor Sarah Polley reflects on times in her life when she faced physical or psychological danger. She remembers how she felt and acted at the time, and how, quote, the power of my adult life informs the relationship to my memories, end quote. After struggling with the aftermath of a concussion, Polley was advised by a specialist to engage her fears and run towards the danger. She does so with riveting clarity in this fine memoir, proving that she is as fierce as she is technical, as vulnerable as she is malleable, as strong as she is critical. Please welcome to the stage, Sarah Polley.
Thank you for having me.
Are you going to do a reading for us?
Yes, I am. I am. I just know what happened yet. I just want to say thank you so much for having me here, and I was just so incredibly honored to be in this incredible list of authors this year. So very happy to be here. I'm going to be running towards the danger. I'm going to be reading from the title essay, Run Towards the Danger. And I'll start at the beginning and I'll read a section, and then I'll kind of skip ahead to another section, depending on how much time we have. I'm going to time myself. Okay. Run Towards the Danger. Let me see. The accident. It is October 19th, 2015. I am sitting on the living room floor, a full carton of Haagen-Dazs pralines and cream ice cream on the coffee table in front of me, while my 3-year-old Eve draws with crayons on the couch, and my 14-month-old Isla sleeps with her head on my shoulder. It is election night, and I am watching television coverage of the federal conservative government getting demolished for the first time in 8 long years. As I spoon ice cream into my mouth, I watch the ocean of Tory blue that covered much of the virtual map of my country shrink into a blue puddle. I hug my neighbors on the porch. All is well. As I spoon a little more ice cream into my mouth, I acknowledge how good life is. I pause. As with all the great moments in my life, I am momentarily distracted by the concern that I might be on the precipice of inevitable impending disaster. The next day, I take Eve to preschool, clean the kitchen, play with Isla on the floor for a while, and then go upstairs to my desk to write. I have been hired to write the screenplay for a remake of Little Women. It's a perfect job. Every night at bedtime, I tell Eve the stories of Amy, Beth, and Meg, and especially Jo. Eve tells me how to tell new stories of the March sisters every night. And I do until I have told every story in the book and have to start making up my own. Eve asks if it's possible to visit the set when the film is made, and I say yes, although I likely won't be directing the film. I want to have another baby, and I also don't want to return to directing when my kids are still so small, and risk missing any of these early years of theirs to 15-hour days on a film set, as that is the particular method by which I lost my own childhood. Before I go to pick up Eve from preschool, I go for a swim at the local community center. I've never been athletic, but I've been taking swimming lessons lately, and for the first time, I felt myself substantially improve at something physical. I have felt my body change from one of a basically inactive person to that of a person who moves. My arms have muscles. My legs feel strong. I come from a family of athletic people, mostly tall, strapping, waspy people who easily take up any given sport and ace it. I've always been made fun of in my family for my lack of energy, stamina, and strength. My brother Mark still mocks me for helplessly throwing down my racket and yelping plaintively, "But I'm sweating," when he tried to teach me how to play tennis when I was 10. He tosses, "But I'm sweating," at me often, and it has become a kind of code for my lack of perseverance and grit. It has become a shameful echo in the back of my head every time I falter in the face of a challenge. So, swimming means a lot to me. I'm working hard at it. I'm getting better. Maybe I'm not such an awful person after all. That may sound like an overstatement of the gravity for me of my lack of athleticism and my desperate need to overcome it, but sadly, it isn't. Almost everyone's family manages to make them feel like a failure. And it is in this context that I imagine the sweet glory of them being proven wrong and acknowledging it, which is, of course, a pipe dream. After my swim, I shower and get dressed, and then realize my blow dryer is not in my bag. I must have left it behind the last time I was here. I have wet hair, and it's a chilly October day. I ask the woman behind the front desk whether she's seen the blow dryer, and she suggests I check the lost and found bin. I don't feel immediately compelled to ask her where the lost and found bin is. This blow dryer holds no sentimental value for me. I can be a wasteful person, a lazy person, the kind of person who thinks to themselves, why rummage around in a lost and found bin when you're sweltering in a winter coat? The point is, I don't need that blow dryer. It's not that important to me, and it would be characteristic of me to leave it behind. And all of this is relevant only because years later I am still resentful of the sudden burst of normal responsibility that led me to go looking for that blow dryer. The woman at the front desk points to a lost and found box in a corner. Obstructing half the bin is a large freestanding poster advertising wellness or programming to achieve said wellness. To get to the bin, I must squeeze between one side of the large poster and the bin itself. Above the box is a very large industrial fire extinguisher. I crouch down, squeezing by the poster, and rummage around in the bin looking for my hairdryer. I become overheated and curse myself both for my recklessness with belongings generally and for caring too much about this particular stupid blow dryer. In frustration, I stand up quickly to fling off my coat. I'm unclear on what exactly happens next. I hear a kind of metallic, dissonant musical crash. Something large has slammed into the floor beside me. I turn and look down to see the large fire extinguisher on the floor. It's rolling a little. My teeth ache as though they have moved around in my head. I've had nightmares about losing my teeth. I stand there, not moving, not speaking, and scan through it the possible remedies, maybe, to losing all of one's teeth that don't involve dentures or surgery. I don't know enough about dentistry. I have this exact thought. I don't know enough about dentistry. I clutch my jaw. Maybe it's broken, or maybe I'm going to pass out. I suddenly realize that I should make sure that someone knows what has happened to me in case I lose consciousness. I hear myself say over and over to no one, in a voice that sounds like a disembodied robot, monotone and repetitive, "A fire extinguisher just fell on my head. A fire extinguisher just fell on my head. A fire extinguisher just fell on my head." My voice sounds like it is coming from beside me instead of from within me. The woman behind the desk seems to be gone. The only people here in the entranceway of the community center to witness this moment are a couple speaking sign language to each other who haven't heard or can't hear me. I am vaguely aware that this might be funny. After a few moments of contemplating the various ways I can tell this story to make people laugh, I become aware that the woman from the front desk is now standing beside me and is asking if I am okay. I repeat to her the only words I seem to know now. "A fire extinguisher just fell on my head." She tells me to stay put so she can go get her supervisor. I stand there for a few minutes and then decide that I don't actually have time to wait for help for whatever injury that's just occurred. I actually don't have time to have an injury at all. I need to get Eve and a friend from preschool and cook dinner for them as planned. I walk out into the world as it will remain for me for much of the next 3 years. Cars are moving too fast. The sun is too bright. The noise of even the wind is unbearable. I feel as though I'm underwater, but I'm completely calm. When I set the intention to move my limbs, they don't move at the speed I think they will, and I keep veering right. I try to walk a straight line down the middle of the sidewalk, but I keep walking onto people's lawns. I have to consciously move myself to the left side of the sidewalk in order to complete a new diagonal that sets me in a forward direction but loses ground again with the sideways movement. I reach a busy street, which I usually jaywalk across, and pause. I am briefly aware that it is hard now for me to judge when it is safe to go. The speed of cars is bewildering to me. I cross the street anyway, deciding once again that it is impossible that anything is really the matter with me. This is just not something life can make room for right now, with kids this age, with the job I've been hired to do. Everything must be fine because it has to be. There simply isn't another option. I pause for a moment to send David, my husband, an email from my phone. A fire extinguisher just fell on my left jaw. No joke. Feel very weird. That night, I make dinner for Eve, Isla, and a friend from Eve's preschool. David has not been able to talk me out of going through with the evening's plans. My hands seem to move very slowly as I chop vegetables, and I have a dull awareness that perhaps I should be sitting down. But I continue to go through the physical movements of making dinner, which suddenly seem to be very plentiful. Each of these movements requires its own conscious thought. Put the fish in a baking dish. Add water to the rice. Plug in the rice cooker. Open the oven door. I try to separate my movements from the booming of the children's voices beside me, which is strangely difficult to do. They seem to be tangled together. How am I supposed to turn the stove on when there's noise in the room? I am aware that this is a new problem for me and an odd one. As the kids are eating the dinner I have somehow put on the table in front of them, Eve isn't listening or is throwing food or is doing something that is annoying me. I snap at Eve. I hold Eve by the arms to stop whatever activity is bothering me. Eve looks startled. So does the little friend sitting at the table. I let go. I back up all the way to the couch in the living room. I am confused about a lot of things right now, but I am certain that I don't ever talk to my kids that way or touch them roughly. I sit down on the couch away from the kids. I turn off the lamp and sit by myself in the darkness of the living room, my children and their friend, an alarmed little portrait, still visible to me in the kitchen at the other end of the house. David moves in to tend to them. I wave my hand in front of my face. I make a slow karate chop through the air. I think to myself, did reality always feel this way? Did it always feel like watching TV? Did the air always feel thick as though I could cut through it with my hand like butter? I share these questions with David. He watches me closely. I answer myself. I suppose if I have to ask these questions, the answer is no. Reality must not have always felt this way. When the father of Eve's friend comes to pick her up, I tell him what has happened to me. He tells me that I am speaking very slowly. According to the notes that David was advised to make in the days following the accident, when my friend's friend and her father leave, I say, "I love you guys." David writes in a comment, an uncharacteristic salutation given that they are not that close. It still makes me laugh to read this clinical documentation of my embarrassing farewell. I call my sister Susie in BC, who is a family doctor, and she tells me that it sounds as though I have a concussion. So leading up to the next section, this concussion stayed with me on and off for 3.5 years, and a lot of that time I couldn't really function, was in bed. A lot of the advice I was given was to rest, to take things really easily, to really titrate all of my activities to make sure I didn't provoke symptoms. So it led to a very, very limited life, and I had periods in that time where I was more functional than others, and I had some really amazing treatment in Toronto from an amazing osteopath named Kanchan Masand who really helped, but everything kept dipping, and then when I had my third child, I went right back to square one, where I was basically bedridden and in the dark. And then I discovered through a friend that she had become much better after visiting the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center concussion program. So This is me finally making my way to Pittsburgh 3.5 years after that first incident, waiting in the concussion clinic. The next morning, Kate and I wait in a brightly lit waiting room with a TV blaring. This room was clearly not designed as a concussion clinic, I mutter to Kate. A young, affable resident ushers us into a clinic room. After a 20-minute neurocognitive computer test that makes me break into a sweat and a short examination by a resident, Dr. Collins comes in what I like to call a burst of America. He is confident, direct, to the point. He owns the space. If personalities had weather systems attached to them, our hair would be blown back. He examines me, looking intensely into my eyes as he quickly moves me through a battery of tests involving dots on popsicle sticks and asking me to stare at my thumb while rotating my head to the right and left. He speaks quickly and loudly. Kate diligently takes notes. I tell him about my symptoms, both minute and large. Stop tracking your symptoms. Stop processing your symptoms. Don't waste your time. He is yelling at me. Then he turns and yells at Kate. He points at her notebook. You stop tracking her symptoms too. You are not helping her. He tells me that from now on I am to start paying attention to my recovery times instead of listening to my body's symptoms. He explains that the clinical trajectories of my concussion have been diagnosed as primarily vestibular with post-traumatic migraine and anxiety. He shows me a diagram of intersecting circles of 6 types of concussion. He points to the vestibular circle, the anxiety circle, and the migraine circle. He draws a line between the vestibular circle and the anxiety circle and then down to the migraine circle. When the fire extinguisher fell on my head, he explains, it led to vestibular problems. This in turn switched on my anxiety, which along with bad advice, led me to stay in a dark room for a long time, which led to my migraines beginning. This fed deeper into the anxiety, which fed more into the vestibular system acting up. He sees this a lot, he says. When patients have vestibular dysfunction, the same parts of the brain that control emotional functioning get affected. So patients who have vestibular dysfunction have an automatic reaction where their heart rate increases and they develop anxiety. He again points to the vestibular circle and then the anxiety circle. But, and here's where it gets complicated, he says, because this pathway is now there, the anxiety can now talk back. He explains that the vestibular symptoms aren't psychological, but because these two systems have become so good at talking to each other, now my anxiety can switch on my vestibular problems. You have to break the communication, he says. You need to stop this, he points to the anxiety circle, from talking to this, he points to the vestibular circle, which talks to this, and then back down to the migraine circle. I tell him that I'm not sure about the anxiety piece. I'm generally a fairly anxious person, but one thing I haven't felt a lot of since the concussion is anxiety. I felt kind of numb, I say. What does a frog do when it's scared, he asks. He freezes, his eyes popping out of his head. There's an awkward silence before I realize he's imitating a frog. Oh, right, I say. What does a goat do? You could just push it over. He freezes again, his limbs rigid, and begins to tilt slowly to one side. He chuckles a little as he recovers from his frozen goat impression and steadies himself. I look at him, confused. This guy is weird. You froze when this happened. It's a way of manifesting anxiety. He looks me right in the eye and leans in close, as though he doesn't already have every molecule of my attention. He says, if you remember only one thing from this meeting, remember this. Run towards the danger. I should now view my symptoms, he says, not as something to be avoided, but as opportunities to increase my threshold of tolerance. I must learn how to run into the discomfort instead of away from it. In order to fully recover, I require daily exposure to anything that has traditionally triggered symptoms or caused me pain. Grocery shopping, parties, screen time, driving, film sets, all of it. My avoidance of the things that have bothered me has made it more and more difficult for my brain to cope with them. I will also be given a rigorous routine of vestibular and physical exercise. I am to do these every single day without fail. I must eat 3 regular meals a day, stay hydrated, and be on a strict sleep schedule. When I feel a headache coming on after being in an environment or participating in an activity that triggers my symptoms, I must not lie down or rest, but do the dynamic exercises they are going to show me or go for a fast walk. Then I must go back into the environment that I was exposing myself to. In other words, instead of just touching my threshold and then coming back down, as I have been advised so often, keep going. You're going to do everything you think you can't do. You're going to be social, you're going to do a dynamic workout every day, you're going to be in the environments that bother you the most. You need to retrain the system. If I find out that you've been lying down in the day or napping, I will scream at you. I will scream at you. He spins towards Kate and jabs a finger at her. I will scream at her. Kate almost drops her pen in alarm. And stop taking notes, you're making me nervous and you're not helping. I don't want to ask him if I will ever get back to 100%. I don't want to hear the same soft sigh and hedged answer I heard from the specialist in Toronto, but I can't help myself, and I ask him anyway. He says without hesitating and still kind of yelling, yes, I guarantee you'll get back to 100%, and sooner than you think. How long do you think, I ask? He considers me thoughtfully and says, 4 to 6 weeks. This is a pretty straightforward case. I wonder now truly if he's a charlatan. I've been suffering with concussion symptoms for 3.5 years, and at my best, I've been operating around 60%. I'm also well-versed enough in the language of doctors to know to be suspicious when someone offers this kind of guarantee of a cure with a timeline, especially when it comes to an injury that no one seems to understand much about. But you're gonna have to work really hard, he adds. He leans in like a football coach. We're gonna have to pin our ears back and go after this thing. I wonder if he's gonna headbutt me to emphasize his point, and I jerk my head back slightly, wary of being reconcussed. I glance at Kate, who immediately looks away from me. We are both on the verge of giggles, and hysteria will break loose if one of us even smiles. We are polite Canadians unused to being yelled at, and even the positive things we say are said with a note of apology. He tells me that I and the people around me have been accommodating this concussion in hundreds of ways, some conscious and some invisible to me. My job is to find out what those accommodations are and to strip them away so that my brain can reacclimatize and be in the world as it used to be. If a room doesn't feel too bright to me, I am to ask the other people in the room if it's bright enough for them and adjust the lights accordingly. If I'm watching TV with someone else and the volume isn't hurting my head, I am to ask them if it's loud enough for them. Suddenly his tone softens and he tilts his head as he says compassionately, "You're a screenwriter. How do you spend so much time in front of the computer? It must really hurt." My guard down, I enthusiastically share with him my discovery of an amazing light filter app called Flux, which cuts the blue light of the screen and has allowed me to look without aggravation at my computer for short periods of the day. But it's a trap. His eyes narrow and he swipes his hand across his throat with like a knife. I'm alarmed. I have to get rid of it? Yep, gone. And you need to work your way up to more and more time in front of the computer. Though he has already insanely guaranteed me 100% recovery, I want to confirm the details. I ask him if I will ever make a film again. He says, "Absolutely you will make a film again. I'll put it this way, you're not going to be totally better until you make a film again, because this is part of what makes you you. Right now you're bartering between different areas of your life, and that must stop now. All areas are equal." I tell him that a doctor in Canada told me with skepticism that making a film one day seemed like a good goal for you to have. Dr. Collins shakes his head, and I can see that he's trying to contain his frustration. That's an awful thing to say to someone. I ask him tentatively what will happen if one day I push myself the way he's suggesting, only to reap the terrible rewards the next day when I'm alone with my kids, trying to get them fed and to school while breastfeeding the baby at the same time. What if I have a terrible migraine as a result of pushing myself too hard and can't do what is required of me? Attack, attack, attack is his immediate response. Push through it. Attack, attack, attack. I feel Kate look down at the notes in her lap. We cannot look at each other. There is no method by which we can explain a sudden outburst of laughter to someone this intense. Just keep going. I nod. I feel nauseous and terrified, but I try to put aside my doubts about his huge claims of recovery. I try to put aside my characteristic awkwardness in the face of such confidence and my feeling of being overwhelmed of what is being asked of me. I try to focus on my mental picture of my friend Meredith flying down the street that day, liberated. I tell him he treated a friend of mine, another screenwriter in Toronto, and she's doing really well. "What's with all the female filmmakers from Canada?" he asks. "What is going on up there?" He's had a weird number of Canadian female filmmakers and screenwriters come down to his clinic with concussions. Indeed, I myself now know at least 4 Canadian female filmmakers who have been to his clinic. The front desk keeps asking me what is going on in Toronto. I tell him that we're a competitive bunch. The pool of female filmmakers is small, but even smaller is the pool of money to make films, so we've taken to bashing each other over the head to put each other out of the running for the public money. Hence, more business for him, and an added bonus of appearing as the doctor character in lots of overly serious, low-budget movies that people will never see. He stares at me. I'm joking, I say. I let out a bad laugh, an embarrassing laugh, to make sure he knows I'm joking. He gives a small smile with about a quarter of one side of his mouth. It's the slightly resentful smile you give when someone thinks the boring joke they told is really funny and it's too awkward to not smile, but it pains you to do so for the dignity it costs you. I hate this moment. I'd like it to end. He leaves the room, and Kate and I erupt into wild, bewildered laughter. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah, and thank you so much for the book. You pretty much explained where the title comes from and why you wrote these essays, which are both funny and very, very, in places, very difficult to read. You mentioned the one essay that nobody wants to talk about is the one about motherhood. Your experience with endometriosis, your experience with having to carry a child after you have had scoliosis and a back brace and so on and so forth. Doctors in your life seem to have been very important. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of these two essays?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I did, through my pregnancies, have an equally kind of miraculous doctor, not as yelly, better bedside manner, named Dr. Bernstein. And I have had, I've had some terrible experiences with doctors as well. Like, I don't want to create a total utopian picture, but I have also had those people that came out of the woodwork and sort of lifted and carried you to the next place and did so with respect and wisdom. And so I do talk a lot about various doctors I've had in my life who went above and beyond at various stages with health problems for me.
Right. And did it work? Did Dr. Bernstein's advice to run towards the danger work for you? Have you sort of? I think the answer is yes, because the book exists. But do you feel like you're in a different place now than you were when you started writing these essays?
So ever since I saw Dr. Collins, I think that I followed the program to the letter for 6 weeks, and I was at 100% at 6 weeks. And I just made another film. I had no concussion symptoms. I had terrible stage fright for my entire life. I just did this. Like, it's a paradigm shift, and it didn't just work for the concussion. Like, I just find, when I'm asked to read in front of a bunch of people, that's the kind of thing for my entire life. I would just say, there's no chance I can do that. It'll undo me. But the only way to find that out is to do it. Right. And I do feel like, in general now, if something causes me discomfort, my instinct is to go in and try to pick at it and figure out why and see if I don't die by doing the thing that frightens me. So it was amazing for the concussion recovery. It completely worked for me. It's worked for about 10 people I know now who've gone there. And it's also just been a complete shift in the way I live.
Right. Well, we probably won't be as lucky as you were to have this doctor at a traumatic point in our lives, but we are very lucky to have this book available to us, and it was an absolute pleasure to have you read for us.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Sarah Polley.
Thanks so much.
Copies of Run Towards the Danger are available at Another Story, bookshops, book table, and I believe Sarah will be there to sign if you would like to get a signed copy. Thank you very much. Our fourth nominee for the 2022 Toronto Book Award is Camilla Gibb, who is here with her latest novel, The Relatives. Camilla Gibb was born in London, England, and grew up in Toronto. She is the author of 4 internationally acclaimed novels, as well as the best-selling memoir, This Is Happy. Camilla has been the recipient of the Trillium Book Award, the City of Toronto Book Award, and the CBC Canadian Literary Award, and she has been shortlisted for the RBC Taylor Prize and the Scotiabank Giller Prize. And here is the jury citation for The Relatives. The Relatives is a beautifully written exploration of family, loss, and love, told through the interconnected lives of Tess, Emily, Lila, Adam, and Sophie. Their lives, much like their inner worlds, bristle with conflict, tragedy, and incertitude. Through their stories, Gibb invites readers into intimate places of her characters' lives as they move through memories, across continents, and grapple with the vulnerability that belies their interdependence. With The Relatives, Gibb offers readers a novel that troubles their sense of obligation and stretches conceptions of the modern family. It's dark, tender, elegant, and full of surprises. To read from The Relatives, please welcome to the WOTS stage, Camilla Gibb.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you who've made it out here today on what appeared to be a kind of not inviting looking day. And thanks to the Word on the Street and to the City of Toronto Book Award. This is a book actually that I finished writing in 2019, and it goes into production and usually comes out a year later. But of course, in this instance, we had a pandemic, and so the publisher delayed it by a year, at which point we were still in a pandemic. So this is actually the first time, I think, that I've been able to read to an audience, of people who aren't filtered through a screen, where I have to see my own face as well. So thank you. The book is, I wanted to get at sort of myriad ways in which we construct family, how we create family, and the relationships between nature and nurture, and what various configurations exist, perhaps trying to get somewhat closer to what my family looks like, which I don't often see represented in literature. I thought I would start at the beginning with a character named Lila. Jackie presses a manila file into my hands for the third time in 4 months. The label is simply marked Robin. I know she thinks it will do me good to take the case on, but she also knows me well enough not to say it. We've been working together now for more than a decade. I interned here during my social work training, and 2 years later, after my first job ended in disaster, Jackie offered me an opportunity to redeem myself under her supervision. She's a mentor and a friend. I was even maid of honor at her wedding to Solomon, a second one for each of them last year. I slap the folder against my palm and smile. Jackie knows I've run out of excuses. Robin was referred to us in the spring by the Children's Aid Society, the way most children come into our services. Our team provides mental health assessment and treatment in cases where the police are involved. This case is a particular mystery. In April, the police found a girl wandering in her pajamas in High Park. A dental exam suggested she was about 11. She didn't speak then and hasn't spoken in the 5 months since. And no one has reported her missing or come forward to claim her. When Jackie first came to me with Robin's case, I was working with a young man who, after several months in a methadone program, had decided to lay charges against his former hockey coach. I knew he would need a lot of additional support once he went public with his story, and I insisted I couldn't take on another case when I needed to be available not only to him, but to any other former players who might come forward as a consequence. While this was true, and while I have seen many disturbing things over the years, what is even truer is that my reluctance to work with children has developed into an aversion. I put Robin's file in my briefcase and take a cab home at the end of the day. The prospect of leaving the evidence of someone's trauma on a bus, just too sad. As I climb the fire escape at the back of my building, a train shudders by on the elevated track 20 feet behind me. I need to move, I say to myself, as I say to myself almost every day. I'm not supposed to be almost 40, single, and living in a shitty apartment. It was a temporary move, a way of extricating myself quickly from Michael. But I've been here for nearly 2 years now. I met Michael 6 years ago in AA. I started going to meetings after losing my first job. Not immediately, but after the night I woke up in the field of my old high school, face down on the track, no memory of how I'd ended up there, unable to find my shoes or my bra. I'd certainly been going to meetings long enough to know that dating anyone in the group was against all the rules. 3 months in, though, about the time Michael and I first talked about having sex, we decided we were fine to share a bottle of wine over dinner. Just one, and only with dinner. I can tell you that every single glass he poured, I measured against mine. If we were going to go share a bottle, I was going to have my half. If he went to the bathroom, I quickly topped up my glass. I started stopping at a bar after work to get some vodka into my system before I got home. Before long, we were gulping down wine in competition. And of course, a bottle lasted only 20 minutes. And what were we going to do then? Well, it was only 7 p.m. Why, the wine shop on the corner was still open. Better get the 2-liter jug this time. You know, just thinking ahead, saving you a trip for tomorrow. But there's never a tomorrow when you're drinking to go black. I had to stop before the light went out for good. I plant myself on the couch and pull Robin's file out of my briefcase. The first picture I come across was taken on May 16th. Just her face, gray eyes looking away from the camera, chin jutting out. Her hair is an indeterminate brown halo. Her skin is so pale it's almost translucent, like egg white. The initial medical report identifies rickets as the likely cause of the bowing of her lower legs. She's being treated for vitamin D deficiency, giardia, pinworm, and anemia. The rest of the report reads like an autopsy. No semen in her vagina, no saliva other than her own. A list of fibers found on her body, including bark, hay, and bird feathers, and a note about traces of raccoon feces found in her hair. Her hearing is normal, and she suffered no damage to her vocal cords. The police had played a recording of a woman's voice speaking in a dozen different languages, but she showed no signs of comprehension. The report concludes that from a medical standpoint, her mutism may be a consequence of head injury, brain damage, cognitive disability, or related to autism or a learning or sensory processing disorder. Melanie, the social worker who has been working with Robin for the past 3 months, doesn't appear to have put Robin at ease. She started with a number of standard play-based aptitude tests, shape and pattern recognition, logic puzzles, counting. Apparently, Robin had whacked the various plastic primary colored shapes into their corresponding holes and then hurled the whole box at the wall. Good for you, I thought. I'd be insulted as well. In a photo taken this summer, Robin's hair is brushed and trimmed and pulled back in a ponytail. She's wearing a white shirt. She gazes away from the camera, same gray eyes and translucent skin. Her chin softer this time, but the overall effect is still haunting. I put down the file and walked to the front window to pull the curtains closed. It started to rain. Smokers huddle under the awning of the bar across the street. If they were to look up, they'd see me in outline, a black shape at a third-story window, a woman without a face. There's a photo among my mother's things, one I wish she'd never kept, of the girl they adopted in 1975. The defiance in the girl's face is painful, a futile attempt to deny her vulnerability. She's only 3 years old. Whatever memories she had then would be lost, at least consciously, to later experiences. It would be the unconscious that would haunt her. I've seen this in other children. I've felt it in them. Without words, it's going to take some creative ways of finding clues to who Robin is, what she's been through, where she belongs. That part doesn't worry me. What does is that Robin's photos evoke a feeling of recognition. It's as if I'm looking at the ghost who lives in me. That's where I'll stop. Thank you. Is my timing okay?
Yeah, it's great. No, it's perfect. Yeah, no, I just have to keep track of time. So.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Camilla. That was marvelous, and I'm glad that you read from that section because Lila and Robin's interaction is probably my favorite. interaction in the book. And it seems so specific. Do you have a background in working with traumatized children, or did you have to do a bunch of research for that?
I did quite a bit of research, actually. I worked with and interviewed a lot of people for the research for this book, including social workers, pediatric psychiatrists,
Right.
Lawyers around fertility law, especially.
Right.
Because that becomes an issue throughout the course of the book.
Right. And what about the book is structured interestingly from my perspective. It's in three overlapping and interconnecting sections with four different major perspectives if you count Emily and Tess as a single unit. First of all, why did you decide to structure the book that way instead of writing it chronologically or separating those stories out into sort of three separate novellas?
I think we all start with huge ambition when we begin a book, and I had this idea that there were going to be 100 families, all these different configurations, and then I would figure out what the relationships between them were. And so, of course, I wrote many characters into being and kind of pursued their narratives, and the ones that really ended up being the most compelling were the ones I rescued from the masses. And so it was always going to be like that. They were always going to be contained stories with threads between them. I dropped some clues along the way. You can figure out what the relationships are.
Right. I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but the sort of the pivot point in the book is Adam, who we first encounter in a prisoner in a sort of concentration camp in Somalia, which seems to come out of left field in terms of the other stories in the book. Can you talk a little bit about him and why you chose to locate him there, at least in the first stages of the book?
Many, many years ago, I wrote a short story about somebody who had been kidnapped by Al-Shabaab, and I had worked in Ethiopia close to the Somali border. And there was something about the notion of being an expat in a world you would never belong.
Right.
And for this man, knowing he would actually never belong anywhere, that kind of allowed me to really dramatize things. It's not, in some ways it's set nowhere, it's set in a room.
Right.
His experience for probably a year, he's in a room with a really strange Norwegian man. And it's really about it's about the claustrophobia of his experience and having to be still when he's a guy who moves all the time and never sits still and never introspects and doesn't want to visit his past, and yet here he is stuck.
Right.
So to me, it's less about the particular location, I think, and he moves between rooms in this throughout this book, but he's critical to the other stories.
Yes, yeah, and his relationship with the Norwegian is also, I think, very interesting and very fascinating.
I know, it's creepy.
The other two major characters are Tess and Emily, a couple who have frozen their embryos and have now broken up. And the decision they have to make is what's going to happen to the embryos.
Well, and they get into this whole notion of ownership, too, right? You know, whose genetic material has been contributed. You have an anonymous donor, sperm donor, and then you have one of the women's eggs.
Right.
And so these questions around ownership are they're complicated. They're legally complicated. They're morally complicated. And so they're frozen, which you can do, right?
Yeah.
They're on ice, and I don't want to give away
No,
how
no,
this
no,
thing
no.
gets resolved.
No.
It takes you down into all these kind of pretty fierce contemporary debates around, I guess ownership seems like such a crass...
Well, when you use that word, I kind of think, that's almost, it makes it sound consumerist almost.
Well, it falls between cracks, right? It's almost like it's not property law, it's not under the umbrella of property law in the way of divesting assets or dividing assets in the aftermath of a divorce. But then, it gets into tricky terrain, especially in the U.S., around, is this a person?
Right.
Are we negotiating ownership of a person?
Where do you come out on issues of in vitro fertilization and the law surrounding it?
I feel like especially within queer communities, I feel like advances have been made that the law has not yet caught up with.
Right.
So the law needs to respond to what's actually happening on the ground. And it was interesting during the pandemic because one of the supply chain issues was sperm.
Are you seriously?
Yeah, because people weren't
Like
going.
in the sense that it got stuck on ships, or
No, donors weren't going in
Oh, oh, really?
to supply.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
I know, and so there was a bit of a sperm shortage. And so there were these kind of, honestly, quite creative, kind of progressive websites that sprung up to kind of match people with donors, which is, kind of old school. That's
Right.
the way it used to be done before it was kind of channeled through a whole pharmaceutical kind of process. And it was about relationship building. Of course, there's all sorts of tricky legal terrain, but it's an industry. It's and so I can see wanting to cut out the profiteers.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But do you think as our society sort of opens up and diversifies, and you've suggested that the law needs to catch up, do you think that the default among legislators and people in charge of making these decisions is still the nuclear family? Do you think they still haven't figured out that there are all sorts of other kinds of families?
I think that the default is not quite that clear. The default, I think, is that if 2 or even 3 parents are of greater value
Right.
to a child
Right.
than a single child, that custody will be shared 2 or 3 ways even.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that it's a nuclear construction. How to describe it? Maybe that's where I'll end.
Right.
Before I reveal too much about my own life, going there.
But then there are all kinds of families in this book, right? And the cliche is that there's the family you're born into, and then there's the family you choose. And I mean, Lila does fall into this relationship early on in the book with Robin, when she doesn't know who Robin is and where Robin came from, and she finds out that Robin is an intuitive musician, and she shows her piano music, and Robin starts playing, and so she starts engaging in this music. She surreptitiously takes her away. She's not supposed to take her off site of the facility. She takes her away to engage in music therapy, which I thought, those scenes I thought were just fabulous. Have you? Again, what kind of research did you do into music therapy and the uses of it and the ways that it can draw out children who suffer from the kind of mutism that Robin did at the beginning of that book?
I don't know that I did research specifically into music therapy. I thought I gave myself a problem, which is here's a child who is not communicating, at least verbally.
Right.
And what are the other sensory kind of ways we can access what might be inside her? And, I'd grown up playing viola, which is sort of a sad instrument that I don't know why many writers or people who publish play viola, but I also, did anybody go to University College at U of T? There were the East and West Hall, which were in the main building. I think it's been converted into a library now, but there used to be a Steinway piano that stood in one of these halls. Hart House also has random pianos scattered about, and you would just suddenly you'd be in the building and somebody randomly had sat down at a piano and was filling this space, like acoustically, with sound. And so I just logistically, because it is a book set in Toronto, I kind of mapped it so that she could get there. And
Right.
it's what Lila used to do when she was a university student. She used to go there and play and get lost in the sound. And so she's sharing something of herself with this child, something of another sensory way of communicating. So I think it was a little more character driven than it was
Right.
as a kind of therapeutic modality.
Right. This book is relatively brief. It clocks in at just under 200 pages, but it is so incredibly dense, and the structure is so incredibly intricate. How long did it take you to write this?
6 years.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
Is that normal for you, or was this harder than your earlier books?
This was harder for a number of reasons. I mean, it was harder because I think my prose has become more and more spare over the years, tighter and more spare. So it's partly a reflection of that evolution. You know, I'd written a memoir before. Like, the last book I wrote was a memoir, and there was something very difficult but also quite liberating about writing a memoir, which was I had some external reference. It wasn't all coming from here, and I found it difficult to write a novel again. And I wasn't convinced I was going to be able to do it even, and that's the thing with novel. I feel like this about my first novel. I wrote the first novel and thought, I'm a person who wrote a novel, but I didn't yet know I was a novelist.
Right.
If I could do it again. And I still feel that way at the beginning of each one. Like, am I capable of this? Partly because you set yourself different challenges, I think, with each one. You're trying to accomplish something different because it would get tiresome, I think, if you weren't.
Right. Well, I mean, Timothy Finley used to say that every time he sat down to start a new book, he had to relearn how to do it.
Yeah.
That, you know, that it's not a process where, it's not like carpentry where, you know, once you've built a chair, you just do the same thing and build another chair.
Yeah. No, you're constructing a whole different universe each time.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I can look back on my work and say, oh, there are echoes of, I mean, I've once read that there are echoes of the author in every character. I think that's true to some degree, but you want to create characters who are pursuing something different from what you've had previous characters.
Right. I don't mean to insult chair makers. I know that there are like beautiful Chippendale chairs and things out there that are works of art. So I don't.
Do you know there was a MacArthur Genius Award given to somebody who invented a chair, who made chairs?
Seriously? I didn't know that.
I think there's a lot of. I think a chair is its own universe.
Maybe that's something for a future book. Somebody who makes chairs. Camilla, thank you so much for giving us that reading and taking the time to talk about The Relatives. It's a terrific book, and it's on sale at the Another Story bookstore table, and I'm sure Camilla will be happy to speak with you and get books signed if you are of a mind. Once again, thank you, Camilla Gibb.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That went fast.
Yeah.
But your day's not done. You've done more. Yeah. That's nice. Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you. me.
This is a nice venue. Love it. And there's a roof. Yeah. So the word on the street will now be up here.
I'm not sure whether they're going to come back here for the fall or I don't know.
Yeah.
Or next year.
It's
next
a
summer, I
lovely
guess.
venue and
Yeah,
it's
beautiful.
airy.
That's great.
And this,
Yeah, no, they really lucked out getting a space for today. The one thing I have been told is that you need to like bring the mics close when you read.
Oh, okay.
And we're into the home stretch. Our final readers for this afternoon, nominated for the 2022 Toronto Book Awards, are Adrienne Shad and Afua Cooper, two of the authors of The Underground Railroad, Next Stop, Toronto. Adrienne Shad is a consultant, curator, and author who has been recognized with the William P. Hubbard Award for Race Relations and the J.C. Holland Award for her research and writing. And Afua Cooper is a multidisciplinary scholar, author, and artist. Her indomitable research on slavery and Black history has made her one of the leading figures in African Canadian studies and an authority on Canadian slavery. And here is the Toronto Book Award jury citation for The Underground Railroad, Next Stop, Toronto. Before and during the American Civil War, 30,000 to 40,000 freedom seekers from the United States escaped slavery and came to Canada. Three distinguished scholars of Black history tell that powerful story in this concise, readable, and well-illustrated book in a way that is accessible for students and general readers of many ages. The detailed social and political history is brought to life in dozens of remarkable profiles of the women, men, and families who made that dangerous journey. We learn how they escaped, the terrible choices they often made to leave spouses and children behind, the jobs they found, the businesses they built, and the ways they contributed to their new home. Originally published in 2002, this new edition retains the appealing format of the original, but has been thoroughly revised and updated with much new information, including a chapter on the archaeology of Toronto's African-Canadian past. The Underground Railroad enriches our understanding of the history of Toronto. To read from and speak about the Underground Railroad, Next Stop, Toronto, and they're each going to speak individually, and if we have time, we may have a little bit of a discussion. Please welcome Adrienne Shad and Afua Cooper.
Thank you very much. I thought I would start out by just explaining how the original book came about and a bit about the new edition. The three of us, Afua Cooper, Karolyn, Smardz, and myself, were the researchers for an exhibit that Parks Canada did in 2002 at the Royal Ontario Museum, and it was called The Underground Railroad, Next Stop, Freedom. So we brilliantly thought that we should put our research to use in the form of a book. And the original edition was the result of that. It was aimed at students from, say, grade 7 and up. So it was very accessible, we felt. It did well. There was a second printing, and then I guess 2 years ago, we were given the opportunity to do a new edition. The original edition focused mainly on Blacks living in downtown Toronto, as well as York Township West, which was north of Bloor at the time. But this edition, we've expanded it a bit and told some stories of people living in Etobicoke, Richmond Hill, Markham, and so on. And we've also included two important pieces of information about archaeological digs that were very important in Canadian Black history that occurred here in Toronto. So I thought I would read something new that we've written about a man who settled in Etobicoke. His name was Joshua Glover. Joshua Glover escaped from his owner in St. Louis, Missouri in the spring of 1850. He found his way to Racine, Wisconsin later that summer and promptly found a job at a lumber mill just outside of town. Glover was enjoying a life in relative freedom, but this was not to last. His owner, Benami S. Garland, discovered his whereabouts and determined to snatch his property back. On March the 10th, 1854, Garland and an armed posse of 4 men, including a St. Louis policeman, a U.S. Marshal, a deputy marshal, and a notorious slave catcher from a nearby town, went to Joshua's home and knocked on his door. When the door opened, the men rushed in. Glover tried to bat Garland's pistol away, but the marshal dealt Glover a sharp blow to the head with his handcuffs. The deputy marshal then struck him with the butt of his whip. Glover hit the floor and was carried to a wagon, a severe wound on his head gushing blood. Garland started off for Milwaukee with his captive, arriving about 3 in the morning to the county jail there. In the meantime, anti-slavery forces got wind of Glover's capture. They began to amass a large crowd to oppose what they considered to be his kidnapping. About 5 o'clock that afternoon, a large crowd of people opposed to slavery started to ram the doors of the jail and eventually breached them. Glover emerged and waved his hat to the crowd. He hopped into a 2-horse wagon that scurried down to the Milwaukee River and crossed to the other side. Glover was then transferred to a lighter buggy and was whisked away. He remained in Wisconsin for several weeks, moving from safe house to safe house to evade the slave catchers. He even spent time back in Racine, as it was rightly believed that the enemy would not suspect him there. After about 5 weeks of hiding out, Glover was transported by one of the Great Lakes ships to Canada West, now Ontario. Many ship captains at this time were willing to hide and transport fugitive slaves to Canadian ports, and Glover was one of them. By April the 19th, 1854, Glover had arrived in Etobicoke. How do we know this? The account book of Thomas Montgomery, owner of Montgomery's Inn and a large landowner in the area, gives us the answer. Montgomery wrote in his account book that he had given, quote, Joshua Glover the Negro 15 shillings, or about $3, as an advance on wages. This was the first of many notations in the account book dealing with Joshua Glover. Glover did farm work for Montgomery, such as chopping wood and harvesting crops. He also rented from Montgomery a small 1-story cabin with a cook stove for $2 a month. It was located near the Humber River. Other African Americans turned African Canadians mentioned by Montgomery were carpenters like John Duncans and John Winston Skanks. Skanks built fences, gates, and a porch for Montgomery. And I really wanted to include the mention of Winston Skanks because I went to high school with 4 sisters, African Canadian sisters, with the last name of Skanks, and I know they must have descended from this man. Anyway, the April 1854 transaction regarding Joshua Glover, recorded in Thomas Montgomery's account book, was the beginning of a relationship with the Montgomery family that lasted for over 30 years. Joshua Glover's story is told in Finding Freedom, the untold story of Joshua Glover, runaway slave, by Ruby Jackson and Walter T. McDonald. Montgomery's Inn at the corner of Islington Avenue and Dundas Street West is now a Toronto historic site and museum. And I just would like to add that there's now a parquet named after Joshua Glover. It's at 4208 Dundas Street West. You can go there, and there's a really interesting futuristic bust of Joshua Glover that was created by Quentin Versetti, an artist in Toronto. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Afua Cooper.
Thank you, Adrienne. And thanks to Word on the Street for the invitation, and to our publisher, Dundurn Press, for helping to facilitate this, and to all of you for coming out. There's so many stories in the book. You read the book and you think that you're watching a movie. That's, Adrienne read one of them. Joshua Glover's story can be made into a film. Susanna Maxwell, Anne Maria Jackson, who was a washerwoman in Toronto, downtown Toronto, Elizabeth Street, Bay Street area, and whose son, Albert Johnson, became the first black postman in, well, I should say Ontario. And so many of these stories which highlight the contributions and which highlight the presence of black people in Toronto and also in GTA. So it's really a new book because there are so many new stories that have been added. Adrienne mentioned the archaeological digs. Right now where the new courthouse is on University Avenue, that's part of the old ward, St. John's Ward, which was where many African Canadians settled in the city. Think of it right at Dundas Street and University Avenue, right at the heart of the city now. And so many artifacts were discovered at that place when they were digging it up in order to erect the new courthouse. And all of that is discussed in the book. But I want to quickly go to the political life of the black community in the city. We're, 1850s, 1860s, you're talking about possibly 2,000 black people out of a population of, say, 50,000 at the time in Toronto. The black community had its newspapers, The Voice of the Fugitive, edited by Henry Bibb, and later on the Provincial Freeman, edited by Marian Shadd. And so many activities took place at the St. Lawrence Hall on King Street. And I'll just read a bit about some of the activities. A main event happened in September this month, 1851, which was called the Convention of North American Colored Freemen. And black people across the city, across the province, across the region, the Upper Great Lakes region, met to talk about black security and insecurity, because slave catchers were coming across the border and capturing many people who had fled from slavery in the United States. So the St. Lawrence Hall was brand new. It was a beautiful space, and that's where many African Canadians gathered, and that's where the North American Convention happened. So St. Lawrence Hall on King Street East was constructed after the Great Toronto Fire of 1849 as a cultural, social, and political center for the city. It was here in February 1851 that an interracial group, which included George Brown, the George Brown, publisher of The Globe, and Henry Bibb, publisher of The Voice of the Fugitive, founded the Anti-Slavery Society of Canada. And many important abolitionists came there to speak, people like Frederick Douglass, Samuel Joseph May, George Thompson. These were the names of the day, the known names of the day with respect to anti-slavery activities. Perhaps the most important anti-slavery event to occur in Toronto also took place in 1851. The North American Convention of Colored People was called and chaired by Henry Bibb himself. He was also a fugitive, a runaway slave from Southern bondage. He had been in Canada for about a year. Following the publication of his successful autobiography, he and his wife, Mary Miles Bibb, a school teacher, moved from the United States across the Detroit River into what is now Windsor, and there they published established and published their newspaper, The Voice of the Fugitive. But back to the convention. The convention met at St. Lawrence Hall for 3 days with more than 50 delegates in attendance, and there they discussed the safety and security of Black people in North America and ways to improve Black life on the continent. On the third and final day, Henry Bibb, James Tinsley, and John Fisher each gave an address summing up the sentiments of the delegates and the questions at hand. The delegates concluded that Canada, with Jamaica running second, was the best place for Black people on the North American continent. And Henry Bibb urged enslaved Africans, enslaved African Americans to run away, and he appealed to free Black people in Canada to help the runaways and help them to settle once they get to Canada. Henry Bibb also urged Black people, enslaved and free, well, in this case would be free, to take up farming, because he felt that through farming, the Black community could become self-sufficient. In addition, the delegates praised Canada for giving refuge to the Black people who fled here and who settled in Toronto and in what we now call the GTA. So thank you very much. That was just one example of the political life that the Black community engaged in, and which presents them as people who had agency, as people who empowered themselves, and as people who felt that they were the ones to create their own future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those readings and for this book, which I think is enormously important. I'm 51 years old, and I did all of my education here in Toronto, my elementary school education, my high school education. I went to the U of T. And the only time we learned about slavery and all of that was in the context of American history. I didn't realize until leaving university that slavery occurred in Canada as well. What do you feel the curriculum is now? Where do you feel that it is in terms of giving students an idea of the rich history of the Black community in Toronto specifically, but in Canada across the board? Do you think we're in a healthy place, or do you think more work needs to be done to modernize the curriculum?
Well, I think more needs to be done. The research is being done all the time. More and more information is coming out. More and more books and articles are being produced. But it's not percolating down to the school level, to the teachers. I think a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable doing it. Maybe they might do something during Black History Month, but they generally are not taking the information and, you know, presenting it to the students as we would like them to do. What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. A big issue too is how education is organized in Canada. Each province has jurisdiction over its own educational endeavors. So the requirements for, let's say, Alberta are not the requirements for Ontario. And then within each province you have various school boards. And so they also do their thing. So there's no central body that mandates that say, you know, the kids must learn Black history. There, for Ontario curriculum, let's say grade 8, there's a social studies, and it may have something called continuity and change. Now it's left up to the teacher to interpret that. What does continuity and change mean? And you can interpret it in many creative ways. You can bring in Black history. Well, unfortunately, that's not happening. Both Adrienne and I are working on a project called A Black People's History of Canada, and we hope to add some remedy to that situation by creating a website where we put learning material, articles, But not only that, where we will put curriculum, we write in curricula and putting them on site, teachers and learners guide on the website. So teachers and parents and students themselves can use that. So there's no excuse to say, well, we don't know what to do, because it's gonna be there. But a lot has happened. I mean, CBC has done, I think, a fantastic piece of work by, having people write articles and then putting it up on the website with some nice pictures. So it's better now than it was 40 years ago,
Right.
but it's still slow.
Right. One of the big debates in the United States right now around education involves critical race theory, which has become kind of a go-to straw man for the Republican Party. Do we face the same problems here in Canada, or is that less of an issue here?
I don't think it's an issue here unless the Conservative Party wants to take that up and make it an issue here. But no, I don't see it as an issue here.
So
Maybe you can add something.
So is Canada still the best place in North America for black people to live?
Well, according to Henry Bibb, in 1851.
Well, in 1851, yeah, but what about 2022?
He felt it was. But interestingly, though, his wife, Mary Bibb, did not agree with him. No, she didn't agree. I think he was just being enthusiastic, and you have to be, right? If you're a runaway and you find refuge in a place where you can live, a decent enough life, you're going to be grateful, rightfully so. But Mary Bibb was a freeborn woman. She wasn't a fugitive slave. She was trained as a teacher in Massachusetts. And when she came to Windsor, Ontario, and started the school, and she saw the situation for the kids, the black kids, how they couldn't attend public school because they were chased away from the public school by the white parents. And she struggled so hard to give the black kids an education. So she basically said it's wickedness that was happening to the black kids and how the government didn't care for them. So while her husband at this conference was saying, Canada is the best place to live, she's saying, look, we're disenfranchising generations of children. It's not the best place to live. And we still need to search for and find that place. And so that's the tension, I would say. So whereas during the Underground Railroad era, Canada was a refuge, did make itself a refuge. But once people got here, they faced a lot of discrimination in education, in acquiring land, in acquiring the land and then clearing the land, and then the surveyors granting the land to Irish and Scottish settlers. So there were so many obstacles placed in their way. As Harriet Tubman said in a publication, all we have is freedom. But to live this life, it's so hard because there were so many, what nowadays we call anti-black racism. Right. So much of that.
We're often reminded how important words are and that words matter. In terms of vocabulary, what's the significance of the change from referring to black people coming across the border on the Underground Railroad as fugitive slaves to referring to them as freedom seekers?
Well, fugitive slaves. Some people reject the idea that they were fugitives because it implies they were criminals, which we don't want to think of them as criminals. And I don't know, carry on.
Well, yeah, for sure. But
and also the word slaves.
But once when they were in America, they were fugitive slaves. But once they crossed the Detroit River, let's say, or the Niagara River, they're something else. But even while they were traveling on the Underground Railroad, they were still freedom seekers. Right. Seeking freedom, chasing freedom. So it's important, I think, for the audience to know that the period we're talking about in our book is this storied era the era of the Underground Railroad, which is from about maybe, let's say, 1825 to 1861. 1861, because the American Civil War broke out then, so there was not the need anymore for enslaved African Americans to seek refuge outside of the American border. So slavery was still happening in the United States during the period that the freedom seekers came over to what we now call Canada. But slavery had been abolished in Canada. So there was slavery in Canada. But the British Crown abolished slavery in 1834. So Canada now becomes this free space on the North American continent. And likewise, Mexico. We often tend to forget that Mexico abolished slavery in something like 1822. But if you were in the upper states, it would be easier to come to Canada than to go to Mexico. If you were in Texas, easier to go to Mexico. So, but there was slavery in Canada, and we begin our book with that discussion with African Canadians who were enslaved and who were free. So we didn't want to skirt over that, just to present this, glorify this era for Canada. And in fact, one of our stories, we talked about the Long family, Peter Long, his children, his wife, who had a farm around here at Todmorden Mills, Patcher Road area. So when I was coming in the taxi, I was thinking of the Long family living around here and farming here.
And that's only one of the many stories that can be found in the Underground Railroad Next Stop Toronto. The other thing I didn't know, by the way, just as a final comment, is that Harriet Tubman set herself up in St. Catharines.
Oh, you didn't know that?
I didn't know that, no.
That's true. And she lived here for a number of years in the 1850s. And what she would do is she met with a lot of people in St. Catharines and tried to, when she went down to kidnap, I guess you would say, or take slaves away. Yeah, wrong word. Liberate people in the area that she was from. That's the area she knew well, which was what?
Maryland.
Okay. These were the people that she was going to get, members of her own family, as well as people in St. Catharines were begging her to please try and liberate. And she did that. She went back in maybe the late 1850s. She moved to New York State and set up an old folks home and so on. But yeah, she did live here for a number of years.
And her church is still here, meaning St. Catharines. So if you ever go to St. Catharines, you can visit her church. It's on Geneva Street. It's called the British Methodist BME, British Methodist Episcopal, and we call it the Harriet Tubman Church. It's still standing. It has been made a national historic site by the federal government, and it's one of our African Canadian site of memory. Harriet Tubman is this binational or transnational hero. She's a national historic person in the United States and a national historic person in Canada. And she's talked about in her book.
Which you should all go and get a copy of. Copies are available at Another Story Bookshop's book table, just over there on the left. And I'm sure that Afua and Adrienne would be happy to chat with you more. And if you'd like to get books signed, they would do that as well. Thank you so much, Adrienne Chad. Thank you so much,
Thank
Afua
you.
Cooper.
Thank you very much.
And thank you once again to the jury for the City of Toronto Book Award for this remarkable shortlist. It's been a wonderful afternoon speaking with the nominees. And on behalf of Word on the Street and the City of Toronto, I would like to thank you all for attending this event. I should also mention that it's wonderful to see you here in person. I would like to echo what Camilla Gibb said about getting so frustrated at looking at my own face on a screen. It's nice to see all of your faces instead. Next, here on the main stage, we will hear from Maude Barlow, author of Still Hopeful, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. Maude will be in conversation with Planet in Focus's Executive Director, Catherine Bruce, and that starts at 4 p.m. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have a great afternoon.